Welcome to the show. Glad to have you with us here today. It is Budweiser's Weekday Sportsbeat with IrishBreakdown.com. I'm Sean Stiers. I am joined by Jesse Stiers tonight. We have an abbreviated show because we've got Notre Dame men's basketball versus Duke coming up at 6:30, the pregame anyway. Tip-off at 7 o'clock at Purcell Pavilion. Our old buddy Tom Noie is going to join us in the second segment of the show tonight to talk a little Notre Dame men's basketball. Are you fired up, Jess? We've put this off for so long. This is the first time we've had Tom on this year. I had to sit back and think about it, and I'm like, we're running out of time. We've got to have him on.
Yeah, and I think this is the most crucial time to have Tom on because
so too.
Depending on how you judge the season and Micah Shrewsbury, I think there's a lot of question marks still out there that need to be what's the word I'm looking for?
Addressed.
Addressed.
One of those. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. So we'll do that with Tom coming up. I mean, we've kind of debated some of them over the last few weeks, and Tom obviously has covered it closely for more than 3 decades at this point for the South Bend Tribune. So Tom's going to be jumping in with us from Purcell Pavilion tonight at about 5:30. So we've got the Notre Dame spring football practice schedule today. We received it from Notre Dame. Few of the highlights: Marcus Freeman's pre-spring press conference is going to be Wednesday, March 18th, so that'll kind of be the unofficial kickoff. First practice is 2 days later, March 20th. Media is going to be able to watch 2 full practices during the spring, 2 partial practices during the spring. We'll get to talk with all the assistant coaches as well as the players over the course of spring practices. And then the Blue Gold football game, April 25th, which you will hear right here on Sports Radio, WSBT.
Yeah, that, not that anyone cares, but that media session availability and first practice is sandwiched around yours truly birthday.
Yes, it is.
19th.
You're right. Nobody cares about that.
Yeah, I know. Not like I'm turning the big 3-0 this year.
Hey, but it's the big 3-0, and it's a Thursday. I believe you were born on a Thursday. And
really?
I think so. You'd have to go back and check. March 19th, 1996. I believe it was a Thursday because I was pacing the hall with a long wait for young infant Jesse to pop out. We got to the hospital bright and early, and the labor pains, they went on for a while.
It's yeah, I'm trying to see what day that falls on. My next big question would be, do people care about their birthdays anymore? Like, do you? I'm curious in the chat if people take the day off for their birthday. I took the day of and the day after because it's Thursday, Friday, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take a couple days here.
Teddy 30K says, I know it was Thursday. You ruined bowling night. He actually got me out of work in the morning. I had just signed on at the radio station I was at. I did like the 6 a.m. news, I believe. It was either 5:30 or 6. And right after that, got the phone call from your mother, and it was like, boom, we're off to the hospital now. But the labor continued into the evening. It was a long labor. All right, let's talk some Notre Dame football. Joel Klatt ranked who he thinks are the top 10 coaches in college football. And this is basically right now. This is like, he's not going back like who's the best over the last 5 years or 10 years. This is really, maybe 5 years would be the limit on it. But he ranked them on, basically based on what they've done over the last handful of years, really since the changes with the transfer portal and NIL and everything else. So Curt Cignetti, Indiana head coach, comes in at number 1 on Klatt's list, followed by Ohio State head coach Ryan Day. Kirby Smart is number 3. Dan Lanning from Oregon, number 4. Marcus Freeman is number 5 on Joel Klatt's list of the top 10 head coaches in America. Steve Sarkisian from Texas, number 6. Cal Whittingham, moving from Utah to Michigan, in at number 7. Kalani Sitake from BYU at number 8. Then Miami's Mario Cristobal, number 9, and Lane Kiffin at number 10. You don't have to go really deep, but any initial thoughts just on that list overall?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'll say. If I did some homework, I don't think my top 10 list would look like that. I haven't had the time to go sit through, every head coach and come up with my top 10 here. But the thing that is most glaring to me personally is I just don't think you can claim Curt Cignetti is the best coach in college football, because it feels like recency bias to me.
But again, he did it on his podcast, the Joel Klatt Show, and that's essentially what he's saying, recency. He's not going back like to when Dabo Swinney, even 6 or 7 years. It's probably been more than 7 years at this point since he won a national.
Yeah, but I still think Kirby Smart is a better head coach than Curt Cignetti.
Okay. Even though,
and I think Ryan Day is a better head coach than Curt Cignetti.
He obviously, honestly, I think the biggest discussion is probably at 1 and 2. Does Cignetti deserve to be at the top of the list? And I've got a comment specifically from Klatt that we'll get to in here in a few minutes. I want to talk more about Marcus Freeman, before we dig, really deep into that. But what Klatt said is, look, Cignetti took over literally the worst program in college football, and in just 2 years, he has been in the college football playoff twice. He just finished an undefeated season, winning a national championship at the historically worst program in college football, and he has lost all of 2 games. He lost to the eventual national champion in his first season, and he lost to the eventual runner-up in his first season, Ohio State and Notre Dame. And obviously the Notre Dame game was in the playoffs, and then he has won every game since then. And that's his case for Cignetti at number 1, not just the success, but also factoring in the fact that he did it at Indiana, where no one had ever won. Not even, we've talked about this before. If Cignetti had even just gone 9-3 in his first 2 seasons, that would be a massive success at a place like Indiana. But he's only lost 2 games and he's won a national championship. So that's why he's got him at the top of the list.
Yeah, I still understand the rationale, and I can see if that's how some might come to their conclusion. But I think Kirby Smart built an empire. He didn't have the luxury of rebuild. I get IU was a historically bad program, but he did it under the parameters of having NIL in the transfer portal. Kirby Smart. When Marcus Freeman first started, they had to build a foundation before you could even, before NIL and the transfer portal could even be a conversation. And those things make building a dynasty or rebuilding within a couple seasons a lot easier. And so, you could say that, yeah, they have they had the edge because they are in the SEC, and who knows what the SEC was doing at that time to lure recruits. But let's not act like when Kirby Smart took over Georgia, that Georgia was like this top premier destination. It had roots, but it wasn't the Georgia that it is today.
It's a fair point to an extent, because I will say this, we were just talking about your birthday in 1996. And just a couple years before that, when I was still a student at the University of Kansas, Glenn Mason was the head coach at Kansas, and he had strung together a couple successful seasons. They went to an Aloha Bowl, and they had a couple winning seasons. He was going to leave Kansas to go to Georgia, and I'm pretty sure they had announced him as the head coach. It was one of those, they announced him as the coach, and then he changes his mind. And a lot of the talk at that time, now again, this is 30 years ago, but a lot of the talk was, look, this is kind of a lateral move. It's not really a move up. So Glenn Mason stuck around. He only stuck around 1 more year at Kansas, and then he ultimately went off to Minnesota. So again, this has been 30 years ago. So we're talking about a lifetime for some people, but Georgia was not quite as low as what Indiana historically has been, or even what Kansas historically has been. But at the same time, Mark Richt built it up, but it was nowhere near the national power that it is under Kirby Smart. So I get that, but Indiana was a lot worse off. Again, we can come back to that. I want to talk more about Marcus Freeman because we have limited time with Tom Noie coming up to talk basketball here in a few minutes. So let's hear what Joel Klatt had to say about Marcus Freeman, who he put at number 5 in his rankings. I kind of broke this up into 3 different comments here because he said a lot, and I kind of want to address it a little bit at a time. So here's some of Joel Klatt's initial comments on Marcus Freeman, number 5 on Klatt's top 10 college football coaches list.
This list is just, these are the guys that I would go after right now. Okay, right now, if I was making a hire as an athletic director. Number 5 would be Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. I think Freeman's outstanding. I think if you look at what Notre Dame was when Brian Kelly left, we, as a college football public, and I think Brian Kelly as well, assumed that Notre Dame had peaked and that there was a ceiling over Notre Dame and that it couldn't be done. And you couldn't get the caliber of player needed to go and potentially win a national championship. Now, listen, I know that he hasn't won a national championship, but he played for one.
Okay, I thought that those comments leading off from Joel Klatt about Marcus Freeman were interesting, about the program and the belief that the program had reached the ceiling. We all know Brian Kelly thought that it reached the ceiling. I guess I didn't realize, if I'm taking Klatt's word for it, that it was so pervasive across college football that there was a belief across a lot of people in college football that the program had reached its ceiling. What did you think of that assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a fair assessment to say that Notre Dame was kind of gridlocked where they were with Brian Kelly as the head coach. I think that there were obviously, between the fans, media, national perspective, that a lot of it was, will Notre Dame ever have the athletes to, compete at the highest stage? I think that they could get to the dance. They could be within those final 10 teams, but
Brian Kelly definitely wanted to make you believe that he couldn't do any better, right?
Yeah. And I think that goes into it as well. It's like it been Brian Kelly well, because he's like, look, I've taken this as far as I can. I've maximized everything. Now I'm going to go chase a different spot and hope to elevate there. But look what I did at Notre Dame with quote unquote limited resources. That narrative was only going to help Brian Kelly. But, I think that over time, when you're kind of force fed the same thing over and over, whether it's the head coach, whether it's the national media, people kind of start to believe it a little bit. But I always kind of thought, Notre Dame could go to the next level. What that next level would look like, what the ceiling would look like, I think that was always hard to tell. But I think Marcus Freeman has obviously, put himself in a position where it's that ceiling talk it's not really there anymore. And I also think that Marcus Freeman has kind of pushed the boundaries internally to help Notre Dame kind of bridge that gap that is being discussed.
And I think that once he had some success and he wasn't whining and moaning, like credit where credit is due. Brian Kelly did a lot of things that did bring Notre Dame into a new century. There were a lot of things that were done after Brian Kelly went there, but it came to the point where he kept wanting more. He kept wanting more. They had just gotten the new practice facility, and there were still, obviously the chef is the thing that everyone wants to talk about. And he goes down to LSU and he's complaining about the chef. Well, he got his chef at LSU. How'd that work out, Brian Kelly? Did the chef push you over the top? You still have to recruit. And at the end of the day, that's it. And I'll give Brian Driscoll credit where credit is due, because for a few years at the end of Brian Kelly's tenure, this is what he was saying, that Brian Kelly needed to leave and Notre Dame needed to find someone who could go out and actually do the recruiting to push Notre Dame over the top, because they hadn't reached the ceiling. The ceiling was glass and there was still a lot to push through. And while I agreed with that sentiment, that they did need someone who could help Notre Dame take that next step, I thought it was a little bit pie in the sky thinking to think that Brian Kelly was just going to up and leave and you were going to be able to go right out and find that guy to make that push, because it didn't seem like Brian Kelly was ever going anywhere. But obviously he makes that move on his own, and who would know that Brian Kelly would actually be the one to hire his successor and bring him in. And that was the guy who would ultimately push Notre Dame, up another level because of the recruiting that Marcus Freeman has been able to do. But that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, and I think another part of it too is, as fans, I think that I tricked myself into thinking Notre Dame could win a national championship under Brian Kelly, but subconsciously you knew that wasn't true. Like if you looked at those Alabama and Clemson teams, and you looked at Notre Dame, you had to trick yourself to say, yes, they could beat one of these teams or, ultimately make it even a relatively good game.
You had to be as good a coach as Curt Cignetti, to be quite honest, right?
Yeah, I think that's
now,
a big part.
Again, in fairness to Brian Kelly on that, I think Cignetti has shown he's a better coach, but Cignetti has also came in at the right time, because of the transfer portal.
Yeah, and I think that's something I wanted to add to what we were talking about at first is there was no better time and situation than when Curt Cignetti inserted at IU. Just not in terms of IU itself, the program, but just how the college football landscape was changing around it as well.
And I get that, but every other coach who's been hired in the last 3 to 4 years has had those same opportunities, right? If you've been hired at a Power 4 school, the transfer portal was still a thing, and it has been a thing, and NIL is still a thing. So,
it still comes down to evaluation of players and getting the players you think best fit. But, again, we can go down this rabbit hole in terms of IU, in terms of the schedule, very favorable schedule that they had the first 2 years. Everything lined up what seemed to be, perfectly for Cignetti. And still, you have to capitalize on the situation. You have to coach. You have to recruit. He did all the things, but the way things lined up for him, I don't think we'll ever see again in college football.
We come to talk about Marcus Freeman. Jesse just wants to keep talking about Curt Cignetti. He can't get him out of his mind right now. Do you have a poster of? No, I guess you wouldn't have a poster of Cignetti on your wall because unless you're throwing darts at it, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, here's some final thoughts from Joel Klatt on Marcus Freeman.
Elevated the talent in South Bend. I think that's absolutely better. There's a reason that the NFL has been knocking around this guy and sniffing around. And there were talks that the Giants wanted Marcus Freeman at one point. Notre Dame was smart to redo his deal back in December. It was very smart on their part. He's just 40 years old. The guy, to me, is class, integrity, toughness. His teams are physical. I think he's learned along the way. He made some mistakes early as a head coach when he got this job, in particular in critical moments in big games. He's gotten much better in terms of game management. So there's Marcus Freeman, number 5 at Notre Dame.
All right, so there's Joel Klatt, who again put Marcus Freeman at number 5 on his list of college football coaches in the country. What would you say though, Jet? I think most coaches, you look at him and it's like, this guy is an offensive guru. Marcus Freeman obviously comes from the defensive side. He's never run the defense in his time as head coach. He's had Al Golden, and he's given a lot of the control to Al Golden and to Chris Ash. What would you say is Marcus Freeman's calling card though as a head coach? What does he hang his hat on, with his time that he's been here now at Notre Dame?
Yeah, I think his calling card goes further than just the X's and O's at the end of the day. And he talked about, toughness and discipline and that sort of stuff. To me, and the thing that has always separated Marcus Freeman, in my opinion, is recruiting. So Marcus Freeman, the recruiter, but to kind of take that to the next step is when you recruit a player and you're trying to convince them to play at Notre Dame for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, however many years it ends up, you have to establish a relationship. And that relationship has to be a two-way street. And there ultimately has to be trust and respect for one another. And so I think that the thing that Marcus Freeman hangs his hat on is not only is he recruiting high-level players, but it's the relationships that he establishes when he's recruiting them. And then also once they're at Notre Dame and they're actually seeing playing time. because that relationship shows me that they trust each other. They have respect for one another. And ultimately, you're going to get the most and best out of your players for guys that ultimately want to come to their head coach, that want to respect and trust their head coach. And I think that was the difference at the end of the day between him and Brian Kelly is Marcus Freeman is recruiting at a higher level, and the recruits that he does get, like his players would do anything for him. I don't think many of Brian Kelly's, maybe 50-50, Brian Kelly guys would be like, yeah, like if I saw Brian Kelly on the street, I wouldn't jump out in front of a car for him. But like if that were Marcus Freeman, I think a lot of guys would do just about anything for Marcus Freeman because they know that Marcus Freeman would do the same for them.
Brian Kelly won games because he was the developmental coach, and Marcus Freeman, he's running what I would call a developmental program. But as we've talked about, because of the fact that he is a so much better recruiter, and it starts with those relationships that you're talking about, that I think is Marcus Freeman's signature, is the ability to build relationships, like we heard from some of the players last week who've just come to Notre Dame. And they, like, some of them were talking about the fact that Marcus Freeman was like the lead guy in on the recruiting, talking to him multiple times a day, like from that and getting the higher level talent. Like that's what puts him over the top in comparison to Brian Kelly. All right. We're going to continue this conversation in a little bit. We're going to take a quick timeout, though. When we come back, the one and only Tom Noie joins us from Purcell Pavilion. We're going to talk a little Notre Dame men's basketball. That's coming up next. Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com. All right. Budweiser's Weekday Sportsbeat with IrishBreakdown.com continues. And that face that you see on the screen right now is the one and only Tom Noie. Of course, it's starting to get a little bit loud over there right now, isn't it?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you generally okay.
Okay. Because I can hear you fine. I'll just try to talk. I'll be as low as possible to cut some of this noise down. But yeah, it's a little loud over here, and rightfully so, because the number one team in the country is in South Bend for the first time in 10 years.
Man, it's amazing that it's been that long, but there's a lot of kind of droughts, I guess, going on, unfortunately, with men's basketball right now. And first, apologies, because like we talked like during the football season, we're like, yeah, let's come on, talk some basketball, and here we are. Basketball's almost over.
It's almost March, and I have not talked to you all season.
I know.
But you know what? There's not been a lot to talk about because it's been the same game after game after game.
Right.
They're close, but they're not close enough. They're good, but they're not good enough. And then Saturday happens where they're just so god-awful that you have absolutely no idea where this whole thing is headed.
Well, this is Micah Shrewsbury's. We were just talking about Marcus Freeman, obviously. Micah Shrewsbury's about to finish his third season. You watch every game in detail. Is there an identity that he has established at this point?
No. And you know what? I don't know if there is one to establish, because let's remember, his first year was all about survival. There was not going to be any identity whatsoever with that ragtag roster that he assembled, because he only had 3 guys coming in when he took the job. So it was like, how do I get enough guys just to be competitive? So that first year was a wash. Last year, you thought maybe you were going to start seeing some sort of identity, but then Marcus Burton gets hurt, and he's gone for 7 games, and it's piecing everything together. And then Matalacco goes down, Braden Shrewsbury goes down, and it was just basically, again, all about survival. This was the year we were going to see identity, and we were getting to see the identity when they beat Missouri, and they were out to a good start at TCU. And then what happens? Marcus Burton drives to the basket, breaks his ankle, he's done, and you're back to scramble mode, because everything you wanted to do was built around the fact that you were going to have Marcus Burton. Now that you don't have him, you were turning the ball over to a freshman, a very talented freshman in Jalen Harrelson, but a guy who's not a point guard. So, again, it's all about survival for the third straight season. One of these years, A, they'll stay healthy, and B, we'll see an identity of how this whole thing is supposed to look. We've seen glimpses. There's been snapshots here, there, a series, a half, but there hasn't been anything sustained to where you're like, that's how it's all supposed to look from Micah Shrewsbury.
Well, let's talk about Marcus Burton. I know you wrote about him yesterday, and he has been out since early December. Starting with the fact, do you think the season looks markedly different if Marcus Burton, like if the injury never happens and he's playing?
It's hard to say, because again, what saw Burton?
Uh-oh. You muted yourself, Tom.
Would we have seen that through the entire season? I don't know. Would it have gone back to just Marcus Burton, here's the ball, you go figure it out, against the Clemsons and the Miamis and the Virginia Techs of the ACC world? You don't know. Would it have been markedly better? It would have been better than 3-11. Like maybe 8-6, 9-5. Like I would take 9-5 right now, playing the number 1 team in the country. So maybe they're not an NCAA tournament team, but maybe, again, as we talked about, maybe we see an identity with Marcus Burton, with Jalen Harrelson, with Brady Kaler, with Cole Serta, Braden Shrewsbury. Like, they have the makings of something, but I just don't know if they know what they have the makings of until you can get full for more than 4 or 5 games.
My question on that: what has Burton being out this season done for the development of Harlson and Serta, and what could that look like next season if Burton is back and now you combine all these minutes that these guys have gotten to play?
Will do nothing but help them because everybody will be a year more experienced. They'll be a year older, a year wiser. They'll know what it's like to have to shoulder the load without Marcus Burton. I think that's one of the things that this program has struggled with is they can play, they can get their games to this level. But when the other team, whether it's Virginia Tech or North Carolina or Virginia or Duke tonight, when the other team goes to this level, Jalen Harrelson and Cole Serta and Braden Shrewsbury and all those young guys, they can't go there yet because they haven't been there. The experience and everything that they've had to go through without Marcus Burton this year will absolutely help them in the future because then they'll know we need Marcus Burton, but if he's not there, we can kind of hold our own this season.
I think another thing that's really, plagued the men's team since the Bonzi Colson days, in my opinion, you have all these really talented guards between Burton, Shrewsbury, Serta, Harlson, guys who can handle the ball on the perimeter and shoot and maybe create their own shot, 15, 20 feet away from the basket. It seems like Notre Dame misses just those easy buckets down low. Someone who can give you a solid, easy 10 points, and it's going to free up those guards on the perimeter as well. I guess, is that something that you think Notre Dame needs to continue to develop, is finding a presence in the paint, kind of like they did, when they really had a lot of success when Bonzi Colson was around?
Easier said than done, my man, because if you're a talented big in major Division I college basketball, why are you coming to the University of Notre Dame if you've got other high major programs knocking on your door? And that's going to be a problem for them this year. In the portal, in the offseason, everybody's saying, well, you know what, just go get a big man in the portal. Get an established college basketball big in the portal. You know what an established college basketball big in the portal will run you? $1.5 million. And that's $1.5 million that this program does not have to spend on a big. So you've got to just make do with what you have, with a Tommy Oneman next year, with a Gon Salongo, with Brady Kaler continuing to develop and put on weight. Maybe next season is the year that the light bulb comes on for Garrett Sundra. So they have the pieces. It's just a matter of getting those guys to max out their potential on a game-to-game basis instead of one game here and then 6 games off.
Is there, of that group that you just talked about, is there a guy that you believe could be their consistent, big man, I guess, going forward?
No idea, because I've never seen Tommy Oneman play. He's been out all year with a knee injury. He may have helped this year, especially when Kevin Jai went down with his knee injury. But we have no idea who Tommy Oneman will be. We have no idea who Gon Salongo will be. Yeah, he's 7'1", but he's in only his 3rd year of competitive basketball. Yeah. So to say he's going to walk in the door and be a 15-10 guy, that's just too big of a step to take in the ACC.
I mean, he feels like, just looking at his profile that you just mentioned, he feels like some of those Mike Gray big men where you weren't going to see that right away. It was going to take 2 or 3 years before it finally shows up.
Like a Martin Gebbin. When Martin Gebbin walked in the door, everybody was like, this guy's never going to play. He was arguably their best player in 2017-18. So he's a developmental guy. But remember, this is a developmental program. This is not a program that's going to go out and mine the transfer portal for this guy and this guy and this guy. Look at where their transfers have come from. Monmouth, Lehigh. This year, their 2 grad transfers are from Northern Arizona and Madonna University, an NAI school in Michigan. So you're not going to get a high-level transfer through the portal. You're just going to have to develop them no matter how long it might take.
What do you think?
Let me jump in. I want to ask, because we're going to start to run out of time here in a few minutes. I want to be sure and ask about Marcus Burton, because again, in that article you had in the South Bend Tribune, Tom, you pointed out he's played in 10 games, which puts him at 30%, which means if he doesn't play again this year, he would qualify for a medical redshirt. So is there any chance we see him this year? And what about next year? Like your confidence that we'll actually see Marcus Burton in a Notre Dame uniform next year?
I'm very confident that we will not see him again this year. Why Notre Dame has chosen to go the route that they've gone is kind of baffling. Like, everybody knew when he had ankle surgery, he was not going to come back from that because it was going to take too long. So why they've never released anything official, I don't know. But Marcus Burton will not play again in 2025-26. They do expect him back in 26-27. But again, the way of the college basketball world where anybody can leave at any time, you always have to throw that caveat out, because if Marcus Burton says, I want to come back to Notre Dame, but if school A, B, or C says, well, you know what, Marcus, here's $2 million. Why don't you come play for us? That's a very hard offer to turn down when you're 18, 19, 20 years old.
Are you getting the tap, Tom? Are you okay? Okay.
No, I'm good.
Okay, go ahead.
I do the tapping over around here, Sean. Come on.
I think the biggest question centered around the program right now is, you talked about, Shrewsbury year one, the mess that he inherited, having to rebuild the roster. Obviously, that wasn't all going to get solved in year two, but I think year three is when a lot of people, wanted to see a little bit more results. But obviously, Burton going down plays a big part in that. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, what do you think the expectations should be, or where do you think this program is headed in the next 2-3 years? And do you think that, Shrewsbury is on that kind of cusp of a hot seat, I guess you should say?
No, and here's the answer I give to everybody who says Micah Shrewsbury should do this, or Pete Pavakwa should fire Micah Shrewsbury. Pete Pavakwa can sit down with Micah Shrewsbury when the season ends, whenever that is. Maybe that's earlier than usual if they don't qualify for the ACC tournament. If Pete Pavakwa can say to Micah Shrewsbury, Micah, I've given you every chance to be successful. I've given you every resource for this program to be successful, and it hasn't been successful. I've given you every chance to build this roster through the transfer portal, through recruiting, through whatever means possible, and you still haven't done it, and we still haven't seen any progress. Then you know what? If Pete Pavakwa can say that, then he'll fire Micah Shrewsbury. But he cannot say that, because they have not given this program the resources to succeed at the ACC level. Say that's a coaching situation. Micah Shrewsbury's struggled in some of the situations this year against Cal, against Pittsburgh, definitely against Virginia. So those are 3 wins that maybe if you had a different coach, they'd be different. So you'd be, instead of being 3-11, you'd be 6-8. That's still not good enough to compete in this league, and it's still not good enough to get back to the NCAA tournament. The only thing that's going to help this team do that, besides the head coach, besides Micah Shrewsbury, is more money and more talent. And you're not going to get one without the other. So until this program decides we're going to spend what it takes, to be successful, whatever that may be, it's really hard to look at it and say Micah Shrewsbury's not doing the job at Notre Dame.
Yeah. So I just to kind of wrap that up, I guess, what do you see as kind of, going forward? What would progress look like to you?
Well, we've seen progress. It just hasn't come with wins. Progress would help. It would help if you had a team that was healthy from day one until the end of the season, and then start winning some of those close games that they've let go against Virginia, against Pittsburgh, against Cal. That has to be progress. Maybe that happens in year 4, or maybe that happens in the last 3 of the last 4 games this season, because I'll tell you one thing, it's not going to happen tonight.
Yeah, that's a bit of a tough ask. Real quick, Harrelson will be out again tonight. 3 games left after tonight, if my math is right, in the regular season. Does it make any sense for him to even think about coming back these last 3 games with where the team is right now?
It will, because he wants to play. And
okay.
I'll leave you with this. I have it on good authority that the plan is for Jalen Harrelson to play on Saturday against NC State.
So you heard it here first.
That's right.
There you go.
That's why we have Tom Noie on the show. Appreciate it, Tom. Great stuff from you as always. It's good.
You got it, guys. Take care.
All right. Take care. That's Tom Noie from the South Bend Tribune checking in from Purcell Pavilion. And again, we've got Notre Dame and Duke men's basketball coming up tonight, 7 o'clock tip-off here on Sports Radio WSBT. Let's take a timeout. When we come back, we'll hit some more football. We've got rapid fire coming up as well. Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com. We continue Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com. Thanks again to Tom Noie for joining us, talking a little Notre Dame men's basketball, all kinds of good stuff. And again, the Irish take on Duke coming up tonight, 7 o'clock pregame show at 6:30 here on Sports Radio WSBT.
I didn't realize Harrelson was out.
Harrelson.
Sorry, Harrelson.
Yes, he's been out for a couple games now, but yeah.
Oof.
Joe asked if I wear a shirt and tie when I do the announcing. Tom Noie was wearing his shirt and tie there. I used to, and a few years ago, that like things have kind of changed. More people like basically I wear a Notre Dame quarter zip. It's a lot more casual these days. For a long time, I did wear the shirt.
So you're new school. Tom is still old school.
Yeah. Well, and Tom writes for a newspaper. Like Tom wouldn't be wearing a quarter zip, I don't think, covering the beat for the South Bend Tribune. Now, not everyone over there wears the shirt and tie, but
Tom he's just old school.
Tie. That's right. Very, very old school. Like more of the announcers wear kind of team gear these days, is what I'm saying. Almost everyone does. It's very few and far between that like radio guys are wearing, ties and things like that. There are a couple, but not a whole lot. Let's kind of wrap up some of the Notre Dame Marcus Freeman conversation we were having. The Joel Klatt top 10 list of college football coaches. Marcus Freeman comes in at number 5. And when Klatt was talking about Marcus Freeman and his spot on the list, he kind of ventured into the whole Notre Dame Miami conversation from a couple months back. Here's what he had to say about that.
And guys, they were right there with Miami in week 1 with a guy that was making his first start in CJ Carr. You could make it a strong argument that they should have been in the playoff. In fact, if the ACC has their you-know-what together and does right by college football and Miami plays for the ACC championship game and wins it, they're probably in. But because of the way that all crumbled, they needed that extra champ. Duke wasn't going to be that champ. We get 2 group of 5 teams in, and Notre Dame is the first one left out because of the head-to-head to Miami. You had to put Miami in because they beat Notre Dame head-to-head, obviously. You can't argue against that. It was the ACC's bungled championship game tiebreaker rule that really screwed Notre Dame, or else they would have been in the playoff. And they could have made some noise. Now, I'm not saying they would have won the national championship. We had a team go undefeated in Indiana. But I'm just saying, this is the level that they're playing at.
And so, again, he was talking about that, where Notre Dame is in the national picture, basically saying that they deserve to be in the college football playoff at the very least for a second consecutive year under Marcus Freeman.
Yeah, and hearing him talk about that actually kind of made me more mad because it furthers my conspiracy. I think Miami did everything they could to make sure that Notre Dame was not in that final seeding, whether it was their tiebreaker rules, whether it was, these campaigns on TV talking so negatively about Notre Dame. They did a lot. And if you go back and you go through the sequence of events of things that had to happen, games that had to be won, it's Notre Dame's chances of that scenario happening again have to be less than 1%, but that's the only scenario that ultimately screws them. So just really, really tough pill to swallow because it's we have a system that's supposed to get the top 12 teams in. And then you hear someone like Joel Klatt say, well, they were probably at worst a top 6 team in the country, but they didn't even get a fighting chance at the end of the day.
Just a massive loophole that kept Notre Dame out. I won't even, obviously the loophole got James Madison in, but it's more the loophole that kept Notre Dame out. Now, again, all the national outcry that you're going to hear is about the memorandum of understanding and how Notre Dame has special treatment if they're ranked in the top 12, other teams, blah, 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 blah. Don't get it, and that's what you're going to hear, but you didn't hear any crying nationally. He's one of the few people who I've actually heard say that. He's also one of the few people, going back to some of the other, right there, you heard him say CJ Carr was a first-time starting quarterback on the road against Miami in the season opener. You haven't heard many other people, sort of rationalize it, explain it that way. But that's what Klatt's, again, I realize not everybody's going to like Klatt, but look, there are very few sort of national people who I think that that you can kind of turn to and you're going to listen to, when it comes to, some of the talk. I think Klatt is one of them because I think that, he's one of the main college football analysts that there are right now. I think him, Herb Street. Is there anyone else that you'd kind of put on that level, on the national level?
I think you can consider the On Three as a group, but that's not a singular person.
That's not even that's even different because that's more host as opposed to analyst. Like a former player who is in that analyst role.
Yeah, I would definitely say that Herb Street and Klatt are like at the top of the totem pole.
So when it comes to Marcus Freeman specifically, again, he comes in at number 5 on Klatt's list of top 10 coaches this season. Cignetti at number 1. Jesse vehemently disagrees with that. Ryan Day at number 2. Kirby Smart at number 3. Dan Lanning at number 4. Marcus Freeman at number 5. So if Notre Dame wins the national championship this season, does Marcus Freeman have to move to the top of that list?
Me personally, I don't think so. I think that he should definitely be ahead of the likes of Dan Lanning. And if we're doing this, if we're kind of using the same criteria for this list, I think he'd have to jump ahead of Cignetti at the end of the day. He would have a national championship. He would have more success all around in the playoff. Let's not forget Cignetti went one and done in his first year. Marcus Freeman went all the way to the national championship. What Freeman does in his second year, can he match with a national championship? That has to be seen. But like right now, my list would probably go Kirby Smart, Ryan Day, Kurt Cignetti, Marcus Freeman, Dan Lanning, and I think that Marcus Freeman would naturally kind of jump Cignetti, potentially Day, but I would have Smart again at the top of my list regardless.
Smart's a few years removed. I mean, they've since the advent of transfer portal and NIL, yeah, Georgia is still in that mix, but he's fallen back a few notches. I think that's kind of where he's at. So I kind of look at Cignetti as almost a 1A. Cignetti and Day is like a 1A, 1B situation. And I look at Lanning and Freeman where they are as sort of a 4A and 4B, because I do think I don't have a problem with putting Smart in number 3, because as Klatt said when he justified his list, this is more about what's happened in probably the past 3 seasons at most, and really based on the direction that college football is going, and that is deep transfer portal moves and deep NIL moves. I can see Lanning just a notch ahead of Freeman. I see them fairly even. I've got some comments from Klatt, and if we have time, we will I tell you what, we'll just lead off rapid fire with that, and we can kind of talk about the Lanning versus Freeman when you hear some of Klatt's comments on that in rapid fire. Let's take this break, though, and then when we come back, it is rapid fire in a short hour, too, because we've got Notre Dame men's basketball coming up, the pregame show, 6:30 Eastern time. So we've got more in rapid fire just around the corner on Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com. It's hour number 2 of the show, Budweiser's Weekday Sportsbeat with IrishBreakdown.com with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. We have limited time because we've got Notre Dame men's basketball pregame starting at 6:30. Notre Dame against number 1 ranked Duke. Coming up tonight, let's get into some rapid fire. Okay, so in the first hour of the show, we were talking about this list that Joel Klatt put out on the Joel Klatt show about the top 10 coaches in college football. He's got Marcus Freeman at number 5. At number 4 on the list, Klatt has Oregon head coach Dan Lanning.
48-8 in his 4 seasons at Oregon. 48-8, and 6 of his 8 career losses came against teams that reached the title game. 4 of those losses to the eventual national champ. So he's lost 5 games over the last 3 years. Think about this. 5 games in 3 seasons that he's lost. Every single one against teams that reached the national championship game. You do not beat Oregon unless you are the best teams in college football. And you can make an argument that he's gaining on those teams and gaining on those teams. Every single year for Lanning, it's just one step further.
That was very interesting to hear his record and to hear like who he has lost to among those losses. Can you see his justification for putting Lanning 1 spot ahead of Marcus Freeman when you hear that, Jess?
No, I don't actually.
Okay.
I think he's encroaching James Franklin territory. I think he wins games he's supposed to, and I think the games where he's on a national stage, I don't care what happens after that. I think, yeah, they go on and they're successful teams, but he wins games he's supposed to, and he loses games that he probably should at the same time. And it's not like he loses these games in a close fashion. He lost to Indiana 56-22. The year before that, he lost to Ohio State like 41-21 after beating them in the regular season. So he gets smoked in those games. And yeah, this person says it's not
like Ohio State. Not only did he lose to Ohio State, he was the number 1 seed.
Correct.
And was supposed to win that game, and they got boat raced. Whether Ohio State ended up winning a national championship or not, he was supposed to win that game. And on top of the fact that they won that head-to-head matchup earlier in the regular season that year.
Yeah, that's I guess what I'm getting at. And it's like this playoff run, you beat James Madison. Ooh, big whoopty. You beat Texas Tech. Everyone knew the Big 12 was bad. Like everyone knew Texas Tech defense was good, had no offense. So again, like I'm not trying to discredit what he's done. I think he's a really good coach. I think he's a really good motivator, and that sort of stuff. But I think he encroaches more so towards James Franklin territory than he does Ryan Day, Kirby Smart type territory. Like I need him to win a game that he's not ultimately supposed to win. And
even Marcus Freeman, like the run. It's not like Marcus Freeman was a top 4
That's
seed.
what I mean. Marcus Freeman beat Indiana, Georgia, and Penn State, and I don't think Notre Dame was picked to win any of those games except maybe IU at home. So
Correct.
Marcus Freeman has won games where he's been the underdog, maybe even been slightly, overmatched, and has won by being a better coach. Like Kirby Smart is taking fake punt plays from Marcus Freeman. That's how bad he beat him or outcoached him in certain instances of that game.
Like that's where Marcus Freeman really showed where he had come as a coach, I think, in those back-to-back games against Georgia and Penn State, and even more so against Georgia, because as you've said, Klatt has Cignetti at number 1. He's got Ryan Day at number 2, Kirby Smart at number 3. You think Kirby Smart deserves to be at the top of the list. Well, if you go off that, then obviously the win in the quarterfinals that Notre Dame had over Smart, like Marcus Freeman outcoached a guy who's won multiple championships in the quarterfinal game last year, and also outcoached a guy who's got, many more games under his belt, basically about a decade or so, more than a decade, more experience than him in the national semifinals when he outcoached and beat James Franklin and Penn State in the semifinals last year. And then even went toe-to-toe with a guy like Ryan Day, who, again, has a lot more head coaching experience.
Multiple times he's gone toe-to-toe with Ryan Day.
I think that's a great point because, like I was saying, I have at the very least Lanning and Freeman, if you're going to go off the rank.
They're kind of in the same tier.
Yeah, like I would definitely put them on the same tier because neither one has won a national championship yet. The three guys at the top of the list have all won national championships now: Cignetti, Day, and Kirby Smart. So I think that at the very least, Lanning and Freeman are on the same tier when you look at it that way. And like Klatt said, it's like it's okay. So you can say, well, here's who his losses are to. Well, who have you beaten? I think that's a very fair point. Yeah.
And to wrap this whole thing up, this top 10 list, because there's so much good rapid fire. Don't even get me started on Lane Kiffin. He deserves to be ahead of Sarkisian, Whittingham, Sataki, Cristobal, all those guys. He's been at multiple stops, turned programs around, and has won more than any of those especially Sarkisian. Like we could have a whole 10-minute dialogue on Sarkisian, but let's move on to some better topics.
But at the very least, Sarkisian has brought Texas back because everyone wanted to keep year after year, wanted to bring him back. NFL Draft Combine is this week. You've got Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Malachi Fields, Emil Wagner, Billy Schrauth, Eli Raridan. Those are the former Notre Dame guys who are going to be participating in the Combine this week. Which of those guys has the most to gain?
Yeah, I think that this boils down to two people. I think one has already started to rise here a little bit based on the Senior Bowl. But I have to go with Malachi Fields and Emil Wagner. I think those are the guys who can most help. I think their ascension up the draft board, and especially Emil Wagner, because I think there's just a lot kind of unproven in his game. And I think a good combine can maybe, answer some questions, check some more boxes. But, I mean, we know Jeremiah Love is a stud. We know Billy Schrauth, when healthy, like we've seen good tape on him, consistent tape. And we know Eli Raridan is going to probably end up being one of the top tight end, draft prospects. To me, it comes down to how far can Malachi Fields and Emil Wagner ascend? And to me, it's more so Emil Wagner, because I think Malachi Fields has the frame and all the intangibles that you want to see in a wide. Like scouts are going to look at him and be like, yes, this is a wide receiver. You know what I mean? But like when you look at Emil Wagner, I think there's still more question marks when compared to the rest of this group.
It's interesting because when Malachi Fields came over here, I don't know if you remember this summer, there were some of the preseason lists that were coming out. And it was like not way too early, but the projection of 26.
I think I saw Mel Kiper had him in the second round.
Well, Malachi Fields was even being talked about as a potential first round guy, which I thought was interesting. It's like, wow, because like it's not like he was a big name at Virginia and he's coming to Notre Dame. And we obviously saw some of the skill he's got. Like he's being talked about right now, like the Buffalo Bills or like the hot team when it comes to Malachi Fields. That's not a definite though, but he definitely has a chance to play himself or combine himself into the first round potentially. If you have the kind of combine that I think that he's capable of having, if he can put up, the right kind of 40 time and like just from a hand standpoint and stuff like that, I don't think he has anything else to prove. But I agree with your other one as well, with Emil Wagner, because I think that Wagner has a chance to show, okay, how strong is this guy? Because, he does have a little bit lighter frame. How agile can he be? How does he move? How does he bend and all those different things? Emil's not going to play, like up to the first round, but could he maybe be a late second round or high third round type guy? I think that's where Emil Wagner, that's the conversation that he could potentially get himself into if he has the right kind of combine this week. Like if he can show the right kind of measurables and potentially open up some eyes. So I agree with that, with what you're saying. Tyler Evans says Jadarian Price. Like I don't think there's enough meat on the bone because he is already so highly regarded. That doesn't mean that I don't, think he's going to have a good combine and do some stuff, but I don't see Price going in the first round. Like if he does, it's going to be very tail end of the first round. That would still be awesome if you go in the first round.
I think his performance will determine if he's a round 3 or a round 2 pick.
Yeah, I think it's more about that than pushing himself up to the first round. That's where I am with Jadarian Price. I think that's a good way to look at it. Vince and I talked about this yesterday. I wanted to get your take on it. What do you think about Jeremiah Love running the 40 and doing some of the other skills at the combine later this week?
I love it for two reasons. I think it'll show that he's a fully healthy Jeremiah Love. I think There's maybe some questions about, the injuries that he sustained, obviously, to end the season on their national championship run. He had to wear that knee brace throughout the playoffs. And then, we didn't see him. Well, we didn't see anyone after Stanford, but we didn't see him in the second half against Stanford because someone decided to, launch their knee into his rib cage. So I think that, one, it'll show that he's fully healthy. And two, I believe that he's trying to prove that he's the most athletic, explosive guy in the entire combine. I literally think he's trying to run like a 4.3 40, and he's going to dominate and show how quick he is and all the other, drills. And so to me, it's like he's trying to separate himself and say, hey, there is no doubt that I'm the best non-quarterback player in the draft. And even if you want to include quarterbacks, I still think you can make the case that he is the top game-changing player in the entire NFL draft this season. And so I see this as him trying to separate himself and really say, hey, like, it doesn't get better than this.
What are you even thinking about here? I'm it, huh?
Yeah, that's what it boils down to me. I don't think he's trying to, like, he's going to be a top 10 pick. Everyone knows, they've seen the film. I think he actually wants to show everyone in real life what the Jeremiah Love package looks like.
Tyler says, how about pick 32 with Seattle for Jadarian Price? That's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, the draft is still a few months away. It's going to depend on what they decide to do with Kenneth Walker, because they obviously still have Charbonneau. I don't know what Charbonneau's health, looks like going toward next year. Most likely they're going to probably take a back at some point. I think Jadarian Price, like, that could be
that's a good fit.
That would be a nice fit, though. Even if Walker stuck around and you had, Price in that mix up there in Seattle, I wouldn't completely rule it out. John B, going back to the Marcus Freeman talk, he says he does have some shocking losses. NIU, Marshall. I mean, you still have to include that bad Stanford team in there as well in year one. But he says that has to count against him when compared to Lanning, doesn't it? He says he'd still rather have Freeman any day of the week, but it seems fair. I mean, Klatt obviously didn't mention that. I think it's fair, but again, like, all of those things happened before you won 3 playoff games in a row and got to the national championship game, and you didn't have any bad losses this year. And
I will say that I think Lanning is a bit more consistent, especially early on in his head coaching career.
Mm-hmm.
But to sum this up, I mean, Marcus Freeman has better wins. Dan Lanning doesn't have quite as severe losses that Marcus Freeman has. And so at the end of the day, what are you weighing your program on? Like, do you want, like, and it's not like those losses weren't detriment to Marcus Freeman that season, because those losses, Marshall, Stanford, like, Notre Dame wasn't a playoff team those years. The NIU loss, that loss shouldn't have happened, but it didn't stop them from making the playoffs, and it didn't stop them from beating IU, Georgia, and Penn State. So again, I think Lanning's a bit more consistent, and Marcus Freeman might have, a couple worse losses, but the highs are higher. And that's what college football is about, is the highs.
Yeah. I think that if anyone wants to use something against Marcus Freeman, that'll be the first thing that they bring up. They'll still go back to, well, you lost to Northern Illinois. Well, yeah, but you also
it didn't hurt them.
Championship. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I've got this cut from a guy named Brooks Austin, a.k.a. the Film Guy. He's got a YouTube channel, pretty big following on YouTube, as well as, his social media platforms. He breaks down college football players on his channel. He talked about Notre Dame quarterback CJ Carr recently, and here is what he had to say.
We're going to have Notre Dame beat reporters say things like week 6 that this is the best quarterback in Notre Dame maybe ever. And like, they're going to talk about him like that. But it might be true. Honest to God. Like, there's a Hall of Famer in there.
Yeah.
Didn't Joe Montana play at Notre Dame? They have a few, but not many.
Yes.
Yeah. It's Montana. It's Brady Quinn. The schedule is poop, and he is talented, and he's going to put up numbers. I promise you, about 6 weeks in, we're going to have people saying this is the greatest quarterback in Notre Dame history.
Okay. So what do you, do you think that guys on the beat are really going to be calling CJ Carr the best quarterback in Notre Dame history by the middle of the season?
So I got real quick. I'm just so proud that you brought this up. This is a guy I've been following for like
Really?
a year now. I know exactly who this is. I follow him on everything. I watch a lot of his analysis and breakdowns. His rank, and he does like top college quarterbacks throughout the season. He's always doing like he's someone I put a lot of weight into because I know he grinds the film. And he's very fair about his assessment. So love that it's made its way here, first of all. Second of all, I think that Notre Dame beat writers are going to start pushing that narrative, whether they're fully bought themselves. But you got to think about where Notre Dame is going to be trending towards that middle of the season. Likely 6-7-0, at least we hope. Moving towards a national championship run. Moving towards CJ Carr ascension in the Heisman, race, I guess you could say. And so I think there's going to be a little bit of that buy-in and a little bit of pushing that narrative, not only because he deserves it, but because of the external factors that Notre Dame is going to be striving towards at the same time, aka the championship and CJ Carr's Heisman. So when you look at it, we've said this before, there hasn't been talent at the quarterback position since Jimmy Clausen and Brady Quinn. You want to say Ian Book couldn't throw the ball downfield like CJ Carr can. And there's a reason why Ian Book career in the NFL is primarily backup to third string quarterback. Like it's just not the same. Like we can't compare. I know Ian Book set a lot of records, but he was in an offense that Steve Angeli could have probably ran at the end of the day. Like he's not. Our biggest complaint since Jimmy Clausen and Brady Quinn is they don't have someone who can push the ball downfield and actually throw the ball underneath, over the top, to the sideline, between the hashes, outside the hashes. Like CJ Carr is the most complete quarterback since Jimmy Clausen and Brady Quinn. And so I don't think it's unfair to start that narrative next season when he's dominating and Notre Dame has that schedule in the queue and they're marching towards a national championship and CJ Carr is marching towards his Heisman candidacy.
Yeah, I think that, like to this guy's point, he didn't even bring up Joe Theismann and the fact that Joe Theismann is also in the Pro Football Hall of Fame along with Joe Montana. But most of the great quarterbacks, Theismann and Montana, namely, happened before the 1980s even rolled around, and like you had to go. Yeah. You had Berline make it to the NFL. Most of his career was as a backup, won a ring in Dallas as a backup quarterback, backing up Troy Aikman. But you have to fast forward all the way to Quinn and Clausen and, whatever extent you want to consider Deshaun Kaiser. I mean, so like there have been some lean years. And, for most people who don't remember those guys back in the 1970s, like Montana and Theismann, I think that there probably will be a case for them to say he's the greatest quarterback ever. But like to the Montana point specifically, the guy only played in 27 games at Notre Dame. He had 25 touchdown passes and 25 interceptions and a little bit more than 4,100 yards in his Notre Dame career. So like if CJ, like he became a Hall of Famer for what he did in the NFL. Yes, he won a national championship at Notre Dame, but he gained his greatest fame, and there were still a lot of questions about Montana coming out of Notre Dame, especially like when you look at those numbers, and the game is obviously in a completely different place right now. So, will you hear that talk in the middle of the season? I don't know about that, but if you do hear it, because again, like when you look at the fact that Joe Montana only played in 27 games, if CJ Carr gets Notre Dame to a national championship game this season, I think that they will have the exact same amount of games played at the end of their career. And CJ Carr's numbers will dwarf what Joe Montana did. Now, again, game is in a completely different place right now. I get that. But like, I think it will be, I don't know about it being justified by the middle of the season, but if CJ Carr gets to the end goal, I think it'll be completely justified that he gets that kind of praise. Because he's also going to end up going much higher than either Montana or Theismann or Quinn or Clausen did in the NFL draft if he gets to that point this year. So, I guess I kind of took away my next point, by rattling on, has the game just changed too much to even compare Carr to those guys, do you think?
Yeah, I relatively do think so, because I mean the spread, the air raid, that component of offenses is just it's in a completely different realm than what it was when those guys played. And that's why when I was kind of doing my comparison, I mainly talked about Brady Quinn, Jimmy Clausen, and Ian Book, some of the guys who have had a lot of success within the time frame of seeing those kind of, like Charlie Weiss brought an NFL offense to Notre Dame. Like that was the whole kind of selling point. And that's why Brady Quinn and Jimmy Clausen were the premier, players within those offenses. So I do think that it's too much of a time gap to use guys like Joe Montana, Tony Rice, Paul Hornig, like those kind of guys. It's just they played in a different brand of football. And like you mentioned, I'm not trying to knock Joe Montana, but he became relevant because of how he played in the NFL, not vice versa.
Right. Exactly. Like night and day.
CJ dominate in college and go on and dominate in the NFL, and that's a completely different story.
Yeah. Yeah. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Notre Dame basketball player Carson Tout has signed an agent with the goal of pursuing an NFL career as a tight end.
Yeah, it gave me flashbacks of Rico Gathers, a 2016 Baylor basketball player, never played football. Cowboys wasted a 6th-round pick on him. What do you think happened? He played a couple games, never had an impact,
Practice
and now you've never
guy forever, and
now you've never heard from him. So I think it's kind of shocking, but if I'm an NFL team, I would not waste a draft pick. Maybe an unsigned free agent, maybe get him to, onto your practice squad or the off-season workouts, see what he can do. But it's so interesting because it's like, why didn't you do any of this before now? Like you just think all of a sudden you have all this athleticism in the world that's just going to translate over to the NFL, the most physical, biggest stage in terms of football there is in the world. It's surprising to me, but I can't knock a guy for trying to maximize that window, because once it's gone,
I mean, Antonio Gates is obviously the best case scenario of this, from never playing, football in college to all the way to the Pro Football Hall of Fame when it was all said and done. But there was a lot of work in between. There have been a lot of guys who have tried this. More power to Carson Tout for giving it a shot. He's obviously got some athleticism. He's not a scorer, but he has the hands, and he's got some instinct for the ball when it comes to basketball and rebounding. But it's a long way to go. And I agree with you. I don't know that I'd be, wasting many draft picks, but the UFL is a thing. So maybe he turns into that. He goes the Brandon Aubrey route. Who knows? All right. We're going to have to wrap it up with that. That's going to do it for Rapid Fire and for the show tonight, because we've got Notre Dame men's basketball on the way. The Fighting Irish hosting top-ranked Duke tonight at Purcell Pavilion. So we've got that coming up. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com.